Hello, and welcome to the second episode of MLOps London On Air. I'm Alex Housley, founder at Selden, a real-time machine learning deployment platform that helps enterprises take control of complexity with enhanced observability for AI systems managed your way. This podcast emerged from the MLOps London meetup, which has been growing strong for over 4 years, now counts over 4,000 members, mainly machine learning engineers and data scientists. Our mission here is to zoom out from the technical trenches and explore how MLOps connects with the bigger picture, strategy, innovation, and the way AI shapes our industries and lives. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by someone who sits at the intersection of advanced technology and high-level business strategy. Evangelos Simoudis is a seasoned venture investor, entrepreneur, author, and corporate innovation advisor. He began working in artificial intelligence back in 1982, and over 4 decades, he's had a front row seat to all 4 major waves of AI development, from rule-based systems to the current generation of generative models. Evangelos is now focused on helping organizations integrate AI at the strategy level, advising boardrooms and senior leadership on the risks, opportunities, and organizational shifts required to make AI truly transformational. His work emphasizes strategic foresight, guiding companies to understand not just where they stand within the industry today, but what kind of future they can and should aim for, with data capabilities and internal culture as key ingredients. What makes this conversation especially timely is Evangelos' emphasis on bridging the gap between technical execution and business vision, a challenge many of us in the MLOps space face every day. So today, we'll explore how leaders can drive scalable, sustainable AI programs and what it means for developers and execs to truly collaborate in this new AI era.
Alex, it's good to see you. Good to be invited to your podcast. I appreciate the opportunity. I've actually been involved with AI for a little over 40 years now, and I got into it almost by accident. I was studying at Caltech, and the first reason to look into AI was the assistance of one of my professors who at that time were designing tools for computer-aided design, and he thought that some of my work may benefit from injection of some AI into them. And then I followed that in my later on in my first job with Digital Equipment Corporation. And that's when I actually got into machine learning. And that experience, frankly, which led to my PhD, enabled me to look at both the application of neurosymbolic systems into data, but more importantly, even for what we're doing today, what corporations are doing today and what we're doing for them, is it enabled me to consider how AI can be applied in very large databases and directly into the databases, as opposed to what at that time was very small data sets that AI was applied onto. Since that time, I've done a couple of AI-related startups. I ran IBM's AI division, and for the past 25 years, I've been investing in such companies, primarily early-stage companies. Today, I lead a firm called Synapse Partners, and we do 2 things. We continue to invest in early-stage startups that develop AI applications for the enterprise. But as you mentioned, we advise both corporations and governments on the use of AI, and our advice comes both in the form of creating strategy for them, critiquing their strategies when appropriate, but also helping them prototype certain applications and workflows that they want to test, and then advising them on how to deploy some of these pilots.
Wow, what a fascinating and long career, and like being involved in AI since the 80s. You will have seen a number of different AI waves, and when we caught up earlier, I was just fascinated to hear your take on how each of those waves evolved and how that applied to the different types of problems that people can solve with AI.
Yeah, so there's one common thread to all of these waves that you mentioned, and that is a lot of over-promising and over-hyping of the technology, the kind of bubble, if you think, that we have today. We've had it about 20 years ago when deep neural networks first were introduced, and we had maybe 20 years before that when neural networks were first introduced to the enterprise, and earlier than that, obviously with rule-based systems. I would say that every wave has led to very important advances, and in each case, we've seen certain industries benefiting from the capabilities of the technology. So, as an example, when we were using rule-based systems, a lot of diagnostic tasks, or industries that had diagnostic tasks, were greatly benefiting from that technology. Later on, when we started working with neural networks, in a sense, first generation neural networks, process industries benefited, right? Because we were doing this optimization type of problems. And then when deep neural networks came in, the first beneficiaries were industries that had vision-related tasks, right? And now we're seeing with the emergence of generative AI, again, industries that have knowledge industries that have a lot of text-related, first of all, text-related data and tasks are benefiting. Obviously, others are too, but I'm talking about the primary beneficiaries. But we'll see this time around how much of the hype the actual application of the technology will be able to match. But it's frothy times.
Yes, indeed, and yeah, no longer kind of a niche topic. It's really, at the very top of the strategic agenda for organizations of all sizes, and certainly the large enterprises that you are advising. So actually on that strategic topic, I read a fascinating blog post that you wrote around defining the strategic foresight in the context of AI innovation. Yeah, could you tell us a little bit about that?
So I would say we help corporations think and look beyond their current horizon. And obviously, defining an horizon is very different for each industry, and is very different, more important, for each corporation within an industry. So we tend to look at the industry and the market, and from that perspective, I think our engagement with both investing and advising is helping a lot, right? We have firsthand experience on what startups are being created and what other startup investors are doing in that front. And that is informing in a very important way where the horizon within a specific industry or within a specific technology is moving to. We look at competition, we look at regulation, which again, with AI is starting to become and should become important. And then we compare all these factors against the particular corporation's readiness. And readiness is defined by us in terms of the people that the corporation has, the culture that the corporation has, and the technology and data that they bring to the table. And finally, what kind of investment appetite they have. We've seen, I mean, when we worked with the automotive industry a few years ago, let's say circa 2017, 2018, When autonomous vehicles were at the forefront of the discussion, and automated vehicles, and the horizon that these corporations were asking to set and the investments they were willing to make were very different than what they're willing to do right now in a world where we have a lot of tariffs, we have threats of various retaliations, and also we've seen the consumer interest in this type of vehicles, right? And I mentioned autonomous vehicles as an example, but every industry, whether it is biotech or retail or hospitality, it has its own challenges, its own dynamics. So again, when we look at to define this horizon, we take all that into consideration. And what we try to produce from that, and how we help our corporation, our corporate partners, corporate clients, is by looking then at their workflows and the applications that they want to develop, or that they even need to develop, in order to fulfill the opportunities that such an horizon presents to them.
That's fascinating. And it really comes down to like the people, culture, and expertise, I think you were saying. And one of the common themes is that people, what they can do is not necessarily in line with what they want to do. So people generally kind of have a high expectations. How do you see that changing in this recent trend where we have this incredible power at our fingertips, and almost goes beyond what people were expecting a few years ago?
Well, a lot of it is when we see high corporate engagement from every constituency within the corporation, from the board on down. We typically can anticipate, and our anticipation is validated. We can anticipate high results, right? Great results. Where we see problems is when whether it is AI or even other technologies are being delineated to some just a technology group somewhere in the organization that is touching upon that, and we talk to corporations. I'll say, yes, I have an AI group somewhere. Sometimes they don't even know where the AI group belongs to, and they're doing something, right? And to us, this is a prescription for failure over time. I mean, even if you can show some interim results. So what we advise corporations is to, first of all, to take a progressive look and think not only in terms of what can I get the next 3 months, but also, as I said, create a roadmap. But the most important advice I believe we have given them, and we have given them examples of based on our work of where this has succeeded, is to engage everyone, all the necessary parties in that conversation on how to move AI in this case forward within the corporation. And that, by the way, includes the users of what you want to produce. Sometimes they are internal users, sometimes they're partners, most times are customers. Because we have several examples of technology that was being developed in a vacuum, in a sense, and not being used by the intended constituency appropriately. I think the most recent example, and I mentioned this also in a different podcast, is what Klarna found. Klarna, a financial services company out of Sweden, they initially thought that through generative AI, they would be able to completely eliminate their customer support group. And they ended up laying off several hundreds of their customer support representatives. And even though the technology was very successful, they found out that their users were not very happy with just this technology interaction, right? And it's not because the technology was providing the wrong answers, but it was more because of how it was providing them. So it was the customer experience, if you will, rather than the accuracy of the results. And as the outcome of this experience, and again, we have to think very positively of Klarna, is that they revamped quickly, and they created now a hybrid model, which appears to be far more accepted by the intended constituency, which is their users, right? And so now they have success. But I think what saved them was the fact that they have the right culture, they have the right agility, and they realized that they needed to take into account the users of the intended technology as opposed to an intended application, as opposed to just looking at what the technology can provide to them.
Right. Yeah. Wow. And that is a classic use case, and that really shows how they're really closing the loop on this AI use case. I think there's a lot of discussion around the cost savings that they could make, but for the program to succeed in the long term, then they really need to understand how this is impacting the customer experience going forwards, right? So
we face again, when we walk into an engagement and we walk into a conversation, one too many times we see corporations and governments thinking only about the technology. And more importantly, actually, not only they look only at the technology, but they look at it only in the context of the workflows, of the processes that they use today, as opposed to broadening their, again, going back to this horizon, this that we were talking earlier, broadening their perspective and starting to think of how can AI enable me to reimagine that workflow, to reimagine that process and make it more efficient, more cost-effective. The other thing that we see oftentimes, by the way you mentioned cost, is that they ignore the cost of deployment. And there are so many issues relating to taking a pilot, which can be very successful, and bringing it out and deploying it, right? Deploying it to your intended community. Yeah. And this cost, there are costs actually relating to whether it is computing, whether it is the data, but there's also the human cost. Do I have the right people in the right places, and do I have the right tooling to help me with that deployment, to make the deployment easier, to make it cost effective? Because many times, just because they have a successful pilot, it doesn't automatically mean that they will have a successful deployment of that, right? So we find ourselves as a firm sitting down with clients and essentially taking the set of pilots, of AI pilots they have developed, and helping them prioritize by looking at cost, by looking at the effort, by looking at the tooling, by looking at what entire process they have to put in place. Because again, when you have an application with maybe a couple of models, maybe that's easier. But we work with corporations that may have 400 or 500 models, and some of these models may be mixed and matched into certain applications. And then so that's what I'm saying. How you do that deployment is extremely important.
Absolutely. It's been obviously a core focus for us at Selden. And, we've heard various stats over the years of the 90% of models that don't make their way into production. And, kind of makes me think, like, how many of those were actually great models, that, in effect, would have made a huge impact in production if only they were able to get through that phase. Do you see that kind of challenge often, like, kind of a lot of value and investment kind of left on the shelf, not actually being able to realize its true value?
Yes, and actually, I will augment what you're saying by we're finding a lot of organizations, I shouldn't say just corporations, trying to shoehorn problems into generative AI solutions, even though the discriminative AI, the with machine learning, obviously, is perfectly adequate. And by trying to do that shoehorning, they may be incurring higher costs. They may be increasing the risk of failure for the deployed solution, and they may be making issues such as governance, monitoring and observability of the application, establishment and detection of biases much harder than they should have been. And being able to come and explain, again, starting from the board of directors on down, that if you want to do this application, again, discriminative AI may be perfectly fine for you. And here now what it means when you're deploying the solution, how you should be monitoring, how you should be thinking about governance, guardrails, how you should be thinking about biases in your broader data set so that you will not get into trouble. Corporations that have global footprint, how you should be thinking about regulation at each deployed region or each region where your application, where your solution will be deployed. These are some hard issues that they don't if you're thinking of a technology-centric pilot development, they don't come forward. That's why we're talking about bringing every necessary constituency together and thinking not only of how do I build a little pilot, but if you start having some success with that pilot, how do I bring it out and deploy it in my organization?
Yeah, very interesting. Kind of follows a theme that, a few years ago, if you wanted to solve some problem with machine learning, you would need to have a team of data scientists and data engineers doing very sophisticated work that was kind of, beyond what the business stakeholders, could understand, on a kind of more technical level. But now we have these, GPTs, which basically anyone can engage with and anyone can get some interesting outputs. Do you think that is something which is kind of driving that trend towards this kind of, GPT making everything a nail, a hammer for every nail, or is it something else?
So this is a very, very interesting and important observation, because I will now switch a little bit, talk about startups. We have increasingly founding teams coming to us and saying that through multi-agent systems, they will actually be able to develop solutions with much less effort than a typical software startup. And obviously, sometimes they will say much more cheaply, even though given valuations and the size of investment rounds, we don't see the cheaply yet. But there's no question in my mind that the ability to quickly generate agents by people who may be able to think logically but don't necessarily have the programming skills will greatly assist organizations. And what we see as an important step in this thinking is trying to understand the capabilities of the true capabilities of the technology, but also the workflows. So if you have so we work with hospitality companies, right? And having there are certain workflows that involve very repeatable and very simple operations. trying to automate those operations with filling forms, or filling invoices, or summarizing certain documents, doing things like this, and developing the necessary agents to do it. That can be great in both improving your productivity, but also cutting your costs down. In the process of doing that, though, rather than just blindly automating an existing task, we're really urging organizations to think about, if you had such agents, can you do the task more efficiently? In other words, can you swap certain steps that will make things more efficiently? And if you can and encourage people now to use this, what you call the GPTs, or the agents, and the capabilities to build them faster and more easier without requiring specialized expertise to test things out. And I think that is one of the great benefits that we see here in this pilot creation. The reason, again, to bring more people in, not necessarily people with pure technical background, is that now that you can start piloting these efficiencies and experimenting with these efficiencies, what will it take to deploy them, right? Mm-hmm. What are the assumptions that you're making? How will your users react to that? Sometimes earlier today I had a conversation with automakers about humanoid robots. And there's a lot of discussion about deployment of humanoid robots in manufacturing assembly lines. And if you talk to the senior management, they say, well, initially these robots will be co-working with the humans. It's not clear how the humans will react unless you test that, right? And unless you engage the assembly line worker or the warehouse worker in doing that type of work. I think that is missing from many of the pilots that we see.
Very interesting. And you mentioned startups, and like depending on the stage, if they're at an earlier stage, then it's kind of a blank canvas, and you don't have all the legacy systems and processes to kind of unpick. But within a larger organization, they'll have more processes documented. Even very small processes can move the needle more significantly. So kind of who do you think has the most opportunity here with agentic AI and automation?
We one of the companies we invested in probably a little over a year ago is a company called Viridium that's based out of Seattle, and they use generative AI actually to detect regulated chemicals, including the so-called forever chemicals in various products. And one of the most important pieces of work, so they started working with 4 or 5 corporations from a couple of different industries. And I always congratulate the CEO of the company, both for selecting industries and be willing to say no to others that may have the problem, but you need to focus on certain things. And second, so we started working with that company in August of 23, before actually becoming fully engaged with them in early 24. And there were a lot of changes as they started working with the initial couple of customers. There were a lot of changes, both in the way that the startup was thinking about their solution and their architecture and what components will have to comprise this architecture. But what we as investors liked about the customers is the customers started thinking about, the work with the startup got them thinking about, do I have the right process even if I have all of this data? Because what we see again in many organizations is that they say, they talk about the volume of data that they have, right? But they don't necessarily think about the applicability of data to the task that they want to achieve, right? And the characteristics of that data for the environment where the task is going to be applied to, right? Again, regulation, governance, all of these biases, all of these things. And so the teams that this startup formed between their employees and the design partners, these customer employees that were design partners, it was fascinating to see it. And when this happens, I mean, we've seen it in the past. As I said, I've been investing for 25 years. We've seen it in the past in other startups. And when it happens, regardless of the technology, magic comes at the other end, right? And when it doesn't happen, either because there is pressure to achieve a lot of revenue or there is arrogance that the technology will solve everything, typically you hit the wall. And so I'm very excited about them because I think that they will be able to advance technology, they will be able to advance the process, and more importantly, they will be able to show a lot of value for their customers.
Okay, wow, yeah, fascinating. And you mentioned a bit earlier about the within larger organizations, you have sometimes the AI teams which are spread across different business units, and they haven't quite yet kind of built a more unified strategy. If someone is working within one of these companies and they are within a team, within a business unit, kind of, what would your advice be to them in terms of how they can kind of up level their strategy, centrally across the organization?
Yeah. We have been, if I were to think of what is happening in AI today, I think of two other technologies that in the last 20 years had a big impact on the enterprise, and that is cloud computing and cybersecurity. And in both of those cases, initially you may have had employees in various parts of the organization touching the technology, and if nothing happened beyond that and it stayed at that level, typically the organization became a laggard adopter of that technology. On the other hand, where we see both bottom-up and top-down engagement, and top-down could go as high up as the board of directors, right? I mean, at some point over the last 20 or so years, cybersecurity became a board of directors issue, right? You had a risk officer, including the chief information security officer, going in front of the board and talking about what are the risks that the enterprise is facing because of what's happening in the world, right? In the cybersecurity world. And the board was taking that into serious consideration in terms of what investments to make, how to position products, and all of that. The same thing needs to start happening in the AI if we're going to see it deployed in the way that we envision seeing it deployed, right? So it's not only about the data scientist or the MLOps engineer or the data ops engineer that is part of some business unit or maybe even of central IT. It really needs to be a top-down and bottom-up engagement to understand what are going to be the systems that will need to change, what will be the processes, how to approach the industry, in which countries you will deploy, and that's when you will have success.
Yeah, and the organizations which are kind of more on the kind of laggard end, slower to adopt, over the last few years, there hasn't been the great examples of kind of transformation, or at least not until recent years. Now it appears that most people have come to terms that the biggest risk is not adopting AI and embracing it fully, but then with that comes other risks as well. What are the kinds of you'd say must-have kind of strategies and processes in place and technologies in place to ensure that an organization can kind of go full speed ahead, but avoid kind of slipping up on any of the broader risks that AI may present?
Yeah, I think that it is very important to understand what you're trying to achieve through the application of AI. So it may be cost reductions, it may be productivity improvement, it may be new revenue, creating new revenue streams. So if you think, for example, of how Google is using Waymo, which has a lot of AI in it, in those vehicles and in those processes, they're trying to create a new revenue stream for the corporation, right? On the other hand, we're engaged in several efforts to automate programming within corporations, a lot of times to take legacy programs and convert them to something more modern. A lot of those efforts have to do with productivity improvement. Right, as opposed to new revenue stream generation. So I think it's important to define those. And once you start defining what the goal is, also start defining how you're going to measure the attainment or progress towards that goal. I mean, if you say that I want to improve my programming efficiency in terms of, let's say, lines of code developed or converted on a monthly basis, okay, well, determine what are going to be interim metrics that are going to allow you to show that you're on the right track, right? That you're then, as I said, as I alluded earlier, think about whether you have the right data to do it. And once you start forming this, and again, the first couple of things are starting from the top, right? This is not, I mean, deciding what are going to be the right metrics for determining whether you're on the right track. It's not going to come from a data scientist alone, right? I mean, a data scientist may provide some input, or a data engineer may provide some input, but it's not going to come, those metrics are not going to be created from there. And then you start building up from that level. But again, as I keep saying, I hate sounding like a broken record here, is that you really need to engage both top down and bottom up people within the organization, and try to and think of agility. Again, we mentioned the example of Klarna. I will mention for counter examples. I have several of them from the automotive industry, right, where it is particularly fragmented and regimented. So when agility was necessary, certain plans about applying AI to, let's say, autonomous vehicles or even manufacturing processes, they could not be adapted quickly enough. And as a result of that, many efforts and actually very large investments did not have the right return.
Okay, interesting. And appreciate, I think you have an appointment in a few minutes, but just wanted to wrap up, if we can, with a question about the future and what innovations around AI excite you the most. I know you mentioned agents a bit earlier, but yeah, just really keen to hear briefly, where you see this going over the next few years.
Yes. So if I were to look at it kind of like along a spectrum, I would say the combination of generative AI and discriminative AI, understanding where one can benefit from another, whether certain tasks can be replaced by newer approaches to generative AI. I think that's quite exciting. Moving from there, assuming that we learn how to properly use and apply and scale single agent systems, whether they're chatbots or otherwise, moving to multi-agent systems, I think creates the next level for excitement, right? Yeah. Our group worked with multi-agent systems for a number of years. Coordinating them, getting them to behave properly. Maybe it's becoming easier, but it's not easy yet. So when we hear about corporations wanting to apply agentic architectures, we always try to clarify, do you mean single agent or do you really mean multi-agent systems? Next level up, I would say this combination of digital AI and physical AI, some people call it embodied AI. I think that's particularly interesting as you see now this software systems being incorporated in adaptive robots. And adaptive robots can be, again, software only, or it can be, more important, it can involve a lot of hardware. And at the very extreme of that, you have this discussion of humanoid robots, right? They capture the imagination of and the pitfalls that they may bring to us. But I think that's how I see the progression. We try to, for our firm, we try to keep tabs of what's happening in each one of these way stations, if I can call them, because it's important for our clients, it's important for our investments, for how we invest and which companies, which startups we invest in, and what areas we invest in. But I think in all of these cases, having, understanding the developments, understanding what is happening both at startups and at the enterprise, including government, becomes a really strong competitive advantage for our firm.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, very strong vision for the future. And Evangelos, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure hearing directly from you some fantastic insights from many years of experience, decades of experience in the AI space. Yeah, great to have you on.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.